Hey, creative souls. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'm really happy that you're here. My name is Johnny. I'm a published fiction writer and a retired adjunct writing professor. For 2 decades, I helped college students get their words on the page. Now, I help people write books, and I teach fiction writing and screenwriting to inmates. I call myself a word witch, and if you want to know more about what I mean by that, check out my video called On Being a Word Witch. I believe I'm on this earth to heal the world through stories, whether it's the ones that I write and tell or the ones that I help you write and tell. I'm new here on YouTube, and I embrace the positive ebb and flow of energetic reciprocity. So if anything I say resonates with you, if anything I offer resonates, please like, share, and subscribe, because obviously the larger my channel, the more people I can reach in my quest to heal the world through story. So if you can help out like that, I would be forever grateful. I also have a free 10 ways to banish writer's block that you are welcome to. If you go to up above, under the banner, you'll find a link to my website, and I'll also put it down below in the description. And yes, it is an exchange. You get that, and I get your email, but it's about a whole lot more than that for me. And it's about growing a community of people who also believe that stories can heal the world. Because I always say, they do, so let's do it together, right? So if you're on board with that and you want to check it out, that is available to you. So what I want to talk about today in this video is I have decided to help people write only one genre. Can you guess which one that is? If you know me at all, you already know the answer to that. But I wanted to talk about why I'm doing that, because I have some very clear reasons in my own mind for doing this. Part of them are personal, part of them are business related. So let me explain. So I've decided to niche down, as I said, in terms of the genre that I will focus on moving forward, both on here and in my teaching, in my workshops, and with clients. So let me talk about how this all came about, first of all. Since leaving academia, I have focused on growing my business, and that feeds my desire to help people write books. That is my absolute passion, and I think my purpose in life. But I made a mistake, and I was doing something in my business that I quit doing in my personal life so long ago. And now that I've made this choice, I can't believe I was doing it. But that thing is, I was trying to be all things to all people. And this happened for a reason. I listened to a lot of other people, basically, and most of them were my business coaches, who I paid a fair amount of money to help me grow my business. And I really finally have realized that they don't understand what it is I do. People have this concept of what writing is, and it's not what non-writers think it is. And so I'll talk about that some in this video, but I had a lot of business coaches tell me, oh, you should focus on entrepreneurs and who have a method, program, or process that they want to put in book form. That's where the money is. And because entrepreneurs want a book that will give them more credibility, that will help them get speaking gigs. And I thought, oh yeah, that does make a lot of sense. And so I did that for a while. And while I was also trying to work with memoirs, because people said, oh, memoir is where it's at. Memoir is hot right now. Everybody wants to write their memoir. So I did that too. And I worked with fiction writers. And I was doing all of it. But what I discovered is kind of interesting. And I will do my best to say this in a way that doesn't piss some people off. But particularly with the genres of working with the entrepreneurs or the memoirs, I discovered something pretty interesting. And that is a lot of people who want to write books. And of course, not all of them. Okay, so I'm going to make this disclaimer now. I'm not saying everybody. So I'm not looking for an argument or a debate. And I know this isn't true across the board, but it was true enough, often enough, in my working with people that I can say this. They already think they know what they're doing. So the memoirist thinks, I am the expert on my life, yes, but not on writing about it. Or the entrepreneur, I'm the expert on my method, program, or process. Yes, I would agree. But you're not the expert when it comes to writing about it. And maybe you've written some copy, But the entrepreneurs that I've worked with, they were very resistant to help. And it just left me feeling in too many cases like, why am I here? And again, I will say, not true with everyone I've worked with, but in enough cases, it's worth mentioning. So one thing that I found is a lot of entrepreneurs have gone to these write your book in a weekend workshops, which sounds really exciting, right? It's like learn a language in a weekend. No, you can't do that. You might come away with like a 15-page lead magnet, and that's awesome. That's great. But it's not what I consider a book. And I had a person who attended one of those come to me and say, okay, can you now help me expand this? I want to turn this into a larger book that I can publish in print form. So what I came away with after reading her 15 or so pages is that she had a lot of the cornerstones that we want to see in setting up a book, but there were a lot of things that were missing. And she was very proud because she put it on Amazon and did this thing that you can do to get your book like up in the top rankings. You can get a certain number of people to review and like it within a certain amount of time after you upload your book to Amazon. And she did that. And again, that's awesome. Like, yes, I want anyone who wants to write to do it and get their words out there. But what she didn't want to hear from me was the truth. And what I told her was, you have a lot of good things happening here. It's a great beginning. And so now what we need to do is start over from ground zero and pull from what you have. And she didn't like that, and she didn't want to work with me. And I was fine. Same thing with memoirists. So this is a tricky one because I will say this before I move on to memoirs. There's a big difference, okay, between being an entrepreneur who writes a book and being a writer. Those are two very different mindsets and two different ways of focusing on writing. There are exceptions, of course. Like, I don't know if you know who Robin Sharma is. He's an interesting person. Check him out if you're into like motivational speaking and the self-help world. So he is a person who had an experience and became an entrepreneur and wrote about his experience and created a following. And he's now a very famous motivational speaker and a very prolific writer. And what makes him an entrepreneur and a writer is that he has the writer mindset. You can see this. I follow him on Instagram, and I see as soon as he gets one book out the door on its way to publication, he is already conceptualizing, outlining, and getting ready to start the next one. And the tools that he teaches in his speaking and in his teachings, he lives them. You can see him living them, and this is what allows him to live a writer's life. Right? So he's an interesting person. It wasn't necessarily a plug for him. I kind of went down a rabbit hole, but he's an example of an entrepreneur who is also a writer. Okay, so then speaking of his writing about his own experience, that takes me to memoir now. So I have found that oftentimes people who keep a journal think that they're a writer. No. Sorry, and that will probably piss some people off, but keeping a journal does not make you a writer. There's a difference between pushing a pen or pencil across a page and being a writer. And I'll talk in just a moment about what I think that is. The problem with keeping a journal and then wanting to write a memoir is people I found get so married to their words. And a journal is the emotional expression of lived experience, right? Well, then to turn it into a memoir, we have to take all of that stuff. That's just to me like a big pile of ingredients. It's not the finished product. And I found that people are so wedded to the things they've put in their journals and the way it's presented. And so then to present them with other ways to actually craft a story for people to consume and have it be understandable and to really follow the conventions of story. Not that we always have to do that. I mean, there is experimental writing, but to be a more experimental writer, which means challenging all the conventions of writing, we have to know what those conventions are first. And so what I find in working with people who have been avid journalers is they think they know about writing. They know a lot about their life experience, but they don't know how to put it into a book. To me, this is what differentiates writers from non-writers, okay? Writers know that writing is rewriting. Writers know that what they initially put on the page is just a beginning, and that the real work comes after that. It's the shaping and changing and moving and rethinking that comes from the initial attempt, right? So being an entrepreneur and wanting to write a book does not make you a writer. Keeping a journal about your personal emotional response to life does not make you a writer. It, of course, doesn't mean you can't be. It just means it isn't a given, okay? So it's like if I were to string some plastic beads on a piece of thread and call myself a jewelry maker, no, that's an insult to jewelry makers, right? Because to make a piece of jewelry, it takes conceptualizing the piece of jewelry, what it will be and why. It means then sourcing the appropriate products for this piece of jewelry that's been conceptualized. And then there's the whole making of the piece, which is about making that concept come to life. And it's the whole process in making it happen. And so it really is it's an art. Making jewelry is an art. And while I could wear my thread of plastic beads around my neck, it does not make me a jewelry maker. It just doesn't. Same thing, if I were to say whirl a bunch of grapes in a blender and throw in some water and some sweetener, say that I'm a winemaker. No, that's really ridiculous, right? I know nothing about the science and art of growing grapes, first of all, when to harvest them, turning them into a pulp and adding all the other ingredients that go in there, and then the fermentation process. I know nothing about that. That's a science and an art in itself, right? And then my last example to kind of drive this home is I used to play clarinet when I was much younger, and I was pretty good at it. And I think I could have called myself a musician then. I can't now because I forget how to do it. I can pick up my clarinet and I can make sound come out of it. I can move my fingers up and down the keys and make different notes, but I am not a musician, right? So just because we go through the act of doing something doesn't make us that thing. There are some people who think that being published is what makes one a writer, and I disagree. I think you can be a writer and never publish a thing in your life. In my mind, what makes someone a writer is it's the commitment to the word, to the written word, to the story, to the craft of shaping stories that really makes a person a writer. It's thinking about the world in a particular way and seeing things that most other people don't see. And then finding ways to incorporate those things into story form that intrigues and flows and connects and really validates oftentimes and ultimately heals. Like I said before, I don't want to discourage anyone from writing anything ever. But what I'm saying is that I've decided to make fiction my focus in the work that I do moving forward. So it's always been my focus in my own life. In my writing life, fiction has always been my first love. Now, it's what I want to focus on and help other people create. And like I said earlier in the intro, this is about me creating a community. It's about me teaching, yes, and also in the process creating community around this idea that stories heal. And so I get, I can already imagine that people, if I've offended anyone, apologies, that's not my intention. And I will explain in a moment why I am choosing this genre over the others. And I do get that there are some fantastic, absolutely fantastic memoirs out there. First one that leaps to mind is The Glass Castle by Jeanette Walls. There's also Lydia Yukonovich and The Chronology of Water. Fabulous, beautiful, poetic memoir. What is it, Joan Didion? Is it, I think, The Year of Magical Thinking? Yes. Joan Didion was a master at memoir. Mary Karr wrote a book, The Liars Club. Fabulous. Frank McCourt, Angela's Ashes, and on and on. There are just tons of them, right? So I get that. And same thing is true with, with nonfiction self-help books. There's The Four Agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz. That is a classic that has stood the test of time. Same with Seven Habits of Highly Effective People. I think Stephen Covey. Jen Sincero wrote You're a Badass. What else? Oh, one of my favorites is by Susan Cain called Quiet. If you don't know that book and you're an introvert, read it. It's very dense, lots of information in it. It almost felt like a love letter to me, although it's based on a lot of research and science, but it felt like a love letter to introverts. And she talks about the plight of being an introvert in a world that can't stop talking. That's the subtitle. And she offers solutions. So it's a fabulous book. I love her work. Who else? Malcolm Gladwell. Anything that guy writes, absolutely. And then Eckhart Tolle wrote, what was that book? Something about now, the power of now. Yes. So all of those books, fabulous, fabulous books that the world needs. Yes. Excellent pieces of writing. What I know, though, is that all of these people that I mentioned, they put the time to write and rewrite again and again and again because they're committed to the process. Okay? So, having said all this, and I kind of alluded to it earlier, I think fiction is where I'm landing. And here's why. I love the alchemical effects of writing fiction. It's what I call the rough magic of writing. Because when you write fiction, you get put through something as the writer. And I think any of you who've done this and you've been in flow, you know that it changes you. When you write fiction, you are changed. Writing any book will change you if it's your first one. But there is something about fiction that simultaneously, and I'm speaking from my own experience, this is how the words I choose to describe what writing fiction is like for me. When I get in that flow and I'm writing about a fictional character, but I want to render them real and human on the page, and I really get into the flow and I start getting into their skin and feeling their heart and soul, I get to a place where I am writing from deep down inside myself and from far, far outside myself. And I'm able to connect with what I call the divine. And I get messages about things that I knew nothing about. I surprise myself with what I put on the page. And I do believe it's coming both from deep within me and far outside me. I have even written, and I'm sure some of you have experienced this, I've written scenes that then have happened in my life. I have created characters that I then meet. And so there definitely is something different about fiction writing that is magical. And I think I've mentioned Alan Moore before, the writer of V for Vendetta. And he believes that writers are the modern day shamans. And there's actually on YouTube, there's a documentary, an excerpt, maybe the whole thing is on there, about him. So I think maybe if you just search for documentary about Alan Moore, you'll probably find it. But I find this fascinating, his take on this. And I also think that writers are shamans because we heal and we bring things to the surface and we make meaning of them and we transform them. And if that's not magic or alchemy, I don't know. But I've experienced this myself, and I will talk more in depth about my own experience and what really, I've always been a fiction writer since I was a little girl. And what got me on this path of wanting to help other people write fiction is a story in itself, and I will put that on a separate video about my own kind of magical experience. So what's really got me thinking about this is I do believe that, I have a book here I want to show you in a second, but I do believe that fiction, even though we're supposedly writing from our imaginations, we are writing with all of ourselves. And from, like I said, far outside ourselves, something different happens when we write fiction. And there is a science behind it. Actually, science has done studies on the effects of fiction, and I will share more about that in upcoming videos. And I'll create a video just about my experience in writing the first draft of my novel, Miranda's Garden, and really kind of upended my life and changed it forever. Here's something else. People think when you write fiction, and maybe you have discovered this, you write fiction and people believe that you're writing about yourself or about them. So I'll make another video about that as well, because this is also another interesting thing that fiction writers encounter. And I think I would say that maybe all of our characters are aspects of us or our lives. I know there have been oftentimes I've thought I was creating a fictional character, and then 2 years later I realized, oh shit, that character is that person and that person and that person that I know, all rolled into one. And so it's interesting to me how the mind, the creative mind, the subconscious works. And I just find fiction very fascinating. One of my reasons for loving fiction is the ripple effect that it can create. And yes, all books can do that. And I do think self-help is important. I think nonfiction books are important. Memoirs are important. However, sorry again if this offends, but memoir, come on, little smidge, can you at least give me a smidge navel-gazing, okay? Yeah. And I think we're at a point with our evolution as a species where we need to get out of our navels and look outside ourselves. We need to move our gaze upward and look out into the world and see what's happening around us. I don't think we can any longer do this. It's every person for themselves. I really just don't think we can. And when we write fiction, we can't just write from our own perspective because we're writing about multiple characters. And if we want to render them believable on the page, we have to be able to understand the character we're writing about that we like the least, maybe even hate. We have to understand their heart and soul deeply. And here's what I have found. In doing that, we can then experience compassion for people who have done horrible things. And I'm telling you, there is something incredibly healing about that. And I think fiction is the answer. And I hope that you agree. And if you don't, and if I'm not for you, then that's totally fine. Yeah, it's better that we part ways, right? But if you are, I really hope that you will stick around and help me grow this channel and, see what I have to offer and become part of this community that I want to grow, because, like I said, it is more than when I mentioned my 10 ways to banish writer's block. It's about so much more than exchanging my little flip book for your email address. It truly is for me about creating a community and, dare I say, a movement, because some things need to change in the world. And I think by writing stories, we can do that. So, okay, I've gone on enough and I've made myself cry, which, damn it, I can do this pretty easily, but I really try not to when I'm on camera. And this, I'll get back to this book in a future video when I talk about the science of fiction. This is really fascinating and I can really geek out about it. But anyway, that is my, I guess, shortened version of why I want to only focus on fiction now. So thank you for listening so much. I appreciate it. And I'm very excited about what we can do together. All right. As always, I'm sending you mad writing mojo. Happy writing.